Okay, here's a question that's going to sound ridiculous until it doesn't. Does anyone else feel bad when battle droids get killed? Not the cool droids, not R2-D2 or BB-8 or any of the droids you're supposed to care about. The battle droids. The skinny, tan-colored, vaguely confused ones who march in neat little rows and fall apart like dollar store action figures the second a Jedi looks at them funny. The ones who say, "Roger, Roger," like it's both their entire vocabulary and their last will and testament. Those droids. Because here's the thing. You already know you feel it. You clicked on this video because you feel it. You just didn't know if anyone else did. They do. Oh, they absolutely do. But before we get into why that feeling is completely justified, let's talk about why it shouldn't exist in the first place. Because battle droids were specifically, deliberately, almost surgically designed so that you would never, ever care about them. When George Lucas started building what would become the Phantom Menace in the mid-1990s, he had a problem. He wanted to tell a story about a galaxy-wide war, lightsabers carving through enemies, massive battles, heroes wading through armies. But he also wanted the prequels to be more accessible to kids than the original trilogy had been. And you can't have a PG-rated adventure where a Jedi Knight cuts through 50 human beings per fight scene. Stormtroopers were people under those helmets. Conscripts, maybe. Fanatics, possibly. But people. So Lucas came up with what might be the most elegant narrative workaround in blockbuster history. Make the enemy robots. Not cool robots, not intimidating robots, cheap robots. Mass-produced, spindly, fragile-looking machines with posture that suggested they weren't entirely sure where they were or why they'd been asked to hold a rifle. The B-1 battle droid was built, in-universe and out of it, to communicate a single message. This does not matter. Don't think about this. Move on. And for a while, that worked perfectly. The Phantom Menace hit theaters on May 19, 1999, and the battle droids in that film were actually kind of eerie. Their original voices, performed primarily by sound effects legend Ben Burtt with contributions from Tom Kane, had this deeper, more clipped, more mechanical quality. Less comedy, more cold insectoid menace. Roger Roger existed, but it landed as flat programmatic compliance, not as a punchline. When the droid control ship gets destroyed at the climax and every single battle droid on the surface of Naboo just stops, mid-stride, collapsing like puppets with their strings cut, the film plays it as a victory beat. The Gungans cheer, the music swells, you're supposed to pump your fist. But some of you watched that moment and felt something weird, something the movie didn't ask you to feel. Thousands of figures, walking and moving 1 second, scrap metal the next. And nobody on screen seemed to notice or care because, well, why would they? They're just droids. And that might have been the end of it. Disposable enemies, disposable reaction, move on to the next lightsaber fight. Except the franchise couldn't leave well enough alone. And thank God for that. Attack of the Clones arrived on May 16, 2002, and the Battle of Geonosis became the first time we saw droids and clones clash at truly massive scale. Lucas peppered the chaos with little droid reaction shots, a B-1 getting its head knocked off and accidentally put back on backwards, still trying to function. There's that whole sequence in the Geonosis droid factory where C-3PO's head ends up on a battle droid body, and the droid's head ends up on C-3PO's golden chassis. And suddenly you've got a battle droid body charging into combat, screaming, "Die, Jedi dogs," in C-3PO's horrified voice, while the droid head on C-3PO's body mutters, "I'm so confused." It's played for laughs, obviously, but underneath the slapstick, there's something the movie doesn't bother examining. Droid bodies as interchangeable parts, identities as accidents of assembly, heads swapped like components because that's all they are. Components. Funny, right? By the time Revenge of the Sith landed on May 19, 2005, voice actor Matthew Wood had taken over the battle droid voice and pushed it somewhere completely new. Higher-pitched, nasally, with this slightly whiny quality that sounded less like a machine executing protocols and more like a deeply put-upon temp worker narrating his own slow-motion catastrophe. That voice changed everything. It wasn't mechanical anymore. It was human in all the wrong ways. Then came the thing that blew the doors off. The Clone Wars premiered as a theatrical film on August 15th, 2008, launching what would become one of the most ambitious animated series in television history. The weekly show followed on Cartoon Network, starting October 3rd, 2008, created by George Lucas and developed by Dave Filoni. And over the course of 7 seasons and 133 episodes, the final season arriving on Disney Plus beginning February 21st, 2020, it did something to battle droids that nobody seemed to plan and nobody could undo. It gave them personalities. Not deep personalities, not complex inner lives, just enough. Enough to cross a line that the franchise apparently didn't realize existed. The animation team ran with Wood's vocal performance like they'd been waiting for permission. They gave the droids expressive body language, comedic timing, and dialogue that sounded less like military communications and more like two guys stuck at the worst job in the galaxy, trying to survive until their lunch break. The very first episode of the series proper, Ambush, Season 1, Episode 1, aired October 3rd, 2008, set the template. A whole battalion of droids gets dispatched to the coral moon of Rugosa to destroy Yoda and a handful of clones. The droids' response to this assignment is just magnificent resignation. The commander rallies them with something approaching bravado, and the rank and file respond with, "Roger, Roger," in a cadence that somehow communicates both total compliance and the complete absence of enthusiasm. Like they've been voluntold for something they already know is going to go badly. And it does go badly. Yoda carves through them with the casual efficiency of a man trimming hedges, and the surviving droids cycle through visible stages of disbelief, panic, and fatalistic acceptance, often within the same sentence. One droid, watching a squad mate get launched into the air, offers a deadpan assessment of their odds that functions as both joke and eulogy simultaneously. That's the New Deal. That's what Clone Wars did. Battle droids in this show were characters now. Small, confused, vaguely anxious characters whose deaths were played for comedy, which, and I cannot stress this enough, was exactly what made those deaths start to stick. Because the comedy is so specific, so weirdly human. Battle droids in Clone Wars don't just die. They die while having opinions. 2 droids are walking a hallway when one turns to the other and says, with something approaching philosophical exhaustion, "I hate this job." Not "malfunction detected" or "combat readiness compromised." I hate this job. 5 words that imply a droid with an inner life monotonous enough to resent. A droid that experiences its existence not as a series of programmatic outputs, but as a grind. A droid that clocks in. They argue about directions like a married couple fighting over a GPS. They try to use binoculars by pressing them against their fixed optical sensors. They attempt dramatic gestures and accidentally detach their own arms. A squad encounters a Jedi and cycles through panic, denial, and grudging acceptance before being destroyed in the time it takes to finish a sentence. A droid borrows the franchise's most iconic human line, "I have a bad feeling about this." And the joke is that a mass-produced unit is using the language of individual embodied fear. But the fear it's describing seems real enough. It keeps leaking through the programming like water finding cracks in a wall. These aren't jokes about robots malfunctioning. They're jokes about people. Small, scared, confused people trying their best in a universe that treats them as nothing. And the comedy lives in the gap between their effort and their reality. And then there's the line that broke everything. You probably already know which one I mean. Somewhere in the Clone Wars 7-season run, and this moment has become so iconic it's essentially escaped the show entirely, living as one of the most widely shared Star Wars clips on the internet. A group of B-1 battle droids, mid-conversation, assert that they are independent thinkers. A claim to autonomy, to individuality, to the idea that they are more than what they were manufactured to be. And then, in perfect unison, without a single trace of self-awareness. Every droid in the group responds with the exact same phrase at the exact same time in the exact same cadence. Roger, Roger. It's a perfect joke, flawless construction. The claim to independence immediately and totally contradicted by the most robotic, conformist response imaginable. Everyone says the same thing, at the same time, in the same voice. The irony is so dense you could build starships out of it. Audiences laugh. They quote it. It becomes one of the defining Clone Wars memes. But here's what happens if you sit with it for even 3 seconds longer than the show expects you to. Those droids meant it. Some part of their programming was generating a genuine desire for independence, a desire that their own architecture made impossible to fulfill. They wanted to be individuals. They were structurally, fundamentally incapable of being individuals. And they didn't know it. They couldn't know it. The very programming that made them say, "I'm an independent thinker," was the same programming that guaranteed they would never, ever be one. That's not a joke about robots being stupid. That's the cruelest possible form of existential limitation. Wanting something you are specifically designed to be unable to achieve, and being unable to even perceive the distance between your aspiration and your reality. And this pattern, droid expresses something personal, droid is immediately undermined by its own nature, repeats across all 133 episodes. In Ambush, a droid displays what can only be called anxiety about facing Yoda, nervously suggesting their numbers should be sufficient. The delivery conveys genuine apprehension, an emotion a machine executing protocols shouldn't be capable of experiencing. Another droid dismisses the feeling entirely, says droids can't feel that way, and the exchange functions simultaneously as comedy and as something deeply uncomfortable. The denial of interiority to a being that is, right then, right there, visibly experiencing it. Every time it happens, the show treats it as a joke. The audience laughs, and then the audience goes home and thinks about it, and feels something that isn't quite laughter anymore. Which brings us to the lines nobody forgets. Across the prequels and 7 seasons of Clone Wars, battle droids are destroyed in quantities that are honestly impossible to count. Tens of thousands at minimum. The vast majority of those deaths are anonymous, silent, played for spectacle. But every so often, at intervals that feel almost random, a droid says something in the moment of its own destruction that stops being comedy and starts being something else entirely. The most famous? But I just got promoted. The line has become so iconic it's blurred across Star Wars media in fans' collective memory. Its most verifiable home is as a B-1 battle droid voice line in Star Wars Battlefront 2, the 2005 game developed by Pandemic Studios and voiced by Tom Kane. A randomly triggered audio clip, a droid cut down mid-stride, protesting the terrible timing of its own death. Fans have associated the line with Clone Wars scenes too, particularly a moment involving a droid manning a tank who gets destroyed by Yoda. The exact wording shifts between retellings. I just got promoted. I just got a promotion. I guess I'm in charge now. The specifics wander, but the emotional payload never does. Think about what that line actually means. Not on the surface. On the surface, it's hilarious. The idea of a battle droid career track is absurd. But underneath, this droid was experiencing something that looks exactly like pride. It had achieved something. It understood its own destruction not as a system shutdown, but as an interruption of a life that was, however briefly, going well. The line works as a joke because the situation is ridiculous. It works as tragedy because the ridiculousness doesn't cancel out the sincerity. The droid really did just get promoted. It really did care. And now, it's nothing. And the fact that this line has migrated from game to show to meme to collective memory, becoming untethered from any single source, living instead as a piece of shared emotional shorthand, is itself proof of the thing we're talking about. Fans don't cite it with footnotes. they cite it with feeling. Other dying lines follow the same pattern. Droids expressing surprise. Droids expressing indignation. Droids, in their final half-second of existence, reaching for a joke, a complaint, a protest. Something that sounds exactly like the way a person would react to the deeply unfair experience of being suddenly and permanently ended. Each line is written as a quick gag, designed to get a laugh and keep the scene moving. Each line, for some reason, refuses to leave your head. And then there are the moments that aren't jokes at all. Battle droids across Clone Wars occasionally do things that are just heroic. Not in a big, dramatic, swelling music way, in a small, confused, accidental way, which somehow makes it hit harder. A droid that follows orders into certain destruction, not because it's brave, but because it literally doesn't know how not to. A droid that stays at its post when staying means getting obliterated. A droid that, in the middle of absolute chaos, does the thing it was programmed to do with a quiet persistence that starts to look, from certain angles, a lot like courage. These moments are the emotional climax of everything Clone Wars built. The comedy established that these droids had something resembling feelings. The dying lines proved those feelings were real enough to be personal. And the heroic moments, small, unremarked upon, often destroyed in the same scene they appear, prove that somewhere in the gap between programming and personality, something was happening that the franchise never intended and couldn't quite take back. But here's where the story gets genuinely wild, because it didn't end with Clone Wars. On October 22nd, 2016, Star Wars Rebels aired an episode called The Last Battle, Season 3, Episode 6, and it did something nobody expected. It brought the battle droids back. Specifically, it brought back a super tactical droid named Kalani, who had been commanding separatist forces on the planet Agamar when Order 66 hit and the Clone Wars ended. Except Kalani didn't shut down. He didn't accept the deactivation command. He calculated, independently, on his own, without anyone telling him to, that the shutdown order was a trick, a Republic ploy. So he refused it. Let that sit for a second. A droid, manufactured to follow orders, looked at an order and said no. Not because of a glitch, not because of a malfunction, because he ran the numbers and decided, through his own analysis, that compliance meant destruction. Kalani kept his garrison of battle droids active for over 15 years after the Clone Wars ended, holding a position on Agamar, still fighting a war that everyone else had moved on from. When Rex, a clone trooper, the droid's old enemy, showed up with the Rebels crew, Kalani forced them into one final battle. One last Clone Wars skirmish, years after it mattered, because Kalani needed to know who actually won. The episode plays it for tension and action, sure, but underneath, it's devastatingly sad. Kalani is a droid who achieved the independence that every Roger Roger B1 unconsciously yearned for. And what did that independence get him? Isolation. Obsolescence. A forgotten outpost on a forgotten planet, commanding a skeleton crew of battle droids who still patrolled hallways and guarded doors for a confederacy that hadn't existed in nearly 2 decades. He was the independent thinker. And independence, it turns out, just meant being alone with the realization that none of it mattered. The episode ends with Kalani calculating the odds of survival against the Empire, the real enemy, the thing that replaced both the Republic and the Separatists, and making another independent choice: retreat. He takes his remaining droids and leaves, just walks away, flies off into the galaxy, and the show never tells you what happens to them. Kalani and his little band of outdated, obsolete, should have been scrapped years ago battle droids just disappear into the stars. Still operational, still thinking, still, against every probability, alive. That's what independence looked like. Not freedom, not triumph, just the ability to choose your own way of being forgotten. And if you thought that was rough, Let me tell you what happened to the rest of them. The Bad Batch. The animated series that premiered on Disney Plus on May 4th, 2021, is set in the immediate aftermath of the Clone Wars, during those chaotic early days of the Empire. And one of the first things the Empire does? Phase out the droid army entirely. Not mothball them. Not decommission them peacefully. Melt them down. There are scenes in the show of battle droids being fed into smelters, their tan-colored chassis disappearing into molten metal, row after row after row. The droids who said, "Roger, Roger." The droids who hated their jobs. The droids who had bad feelings about things and tried to use binoculars and argued about directions. Smelted into raw material for whatever the Empire needed next. And here's the punchline that isn't funny at all. The Empire replaced them with stormtroopers, human soldiers, real people in white armor. And those stormtroopers, the ones who were supposed to be the upgrade, the improvement over disposable machines, turned out to be less individualistic than the droids ever were. The B-1s complained. They bickered. They expressed anxiety and pride and confusion and fear. The stormtroopers? Faceless, silent, interchangeable in a way the droids, despite being literally identical, somehow never managed to be. The Empire fixed the problem of droids developing accidental personalities by replacing them with humans who had been trained to have none. Think about that for too long, and it'll ruin your afternoon. The droids weren't even allowed a dignified end. They were raw material. They were always raw material. That was the point of them, in the story and in the storytelling. And watching them dissolve into slag, knowing what you know about their little personalities and their dumb jokes and their weird, unearnable, impossible-to-explain capacity for something that looked like feeling. It hits different than the show probably intended. But maybe the strangest chapter in the Battle Droid afterlife belongs to a single B-1 with a name, a personality, and a body count. His name was Mr. Bones. He showed up in Chuck Wendig's Aftermath trilogy, 3 novels published between 2015 and 2017, set after the fall of the Empire. Mr. Bones was a B-1 battle droid, same model as every Roger Roger unit you've ever watched get sliced apart. Except this one had been salvaged and rebuilt by a kid named Temmin Wexley, the same Snap Wexley who'd later fly with the Resistance. Temmin found a B-1 chassis, reprogrammed it, modified it, and what emerged was unsettling. Mr. Bones was hyper-violent, fiercely loyal, and had a personality that sat somewhere between attack dog and deranged best friend. He'd hum and sing while dismembering enemies. He called Temmin Master Temmin with a devotion that was genuinely touching and also slightly terrifying. But here's what matters about Mr. Bones for our purposes. He was proof. Proof that the personality glitches Clone Wars showed us weren't just a cartoon gag. A single B-1, given the chance to exist outside its programming, didn't just develop a personality. It developed one so vivid and so fierce that it became one of the most beloved characters in the entire novel series. Mr. Bones sacrificed himself in Empire's End, the final book of the trilogy, going down fighting to protect the people he loved. A B-1 battle droid, the same model designed to be cut apart by the dozen without consequence, dying a hero's death in a story that treated his sacrifice with genuine weight. Same chassis as every droid Yoda ever flicked into a wall. Same model number. Same spindly limbs, same vaguely confused head shape. Just given a chance. All those B-1s in Clone Wars who said, "I hate this job," and "I have a bad feeling about this," and "but I just got promoted." Mr. Bones is what happens when one of them survives long enough to become someone. And the fact that most of them never got that chance is the whole tragedy in a single sentence. So, back to the question. Does anyone else feel bad when battle droids get killed? Yeah, you do. And now you know why. And you know you're not weird for it. And honestly, you're right. The droids were designed, in-universe by the Trade Federation, out-of-universe by George Lucas, to not matter. They were manufactured to be disposable. Their thin limbs invited dismemberment. Their identical faces prevented attachment. Their silly voices ensured you'd laugh instead of mourn. Everything about them screamed temporary, forgettable, meaningless. And it worked. For about 5 minutes. Because then Matthew Wood gave them a voice that sounded like a guy having the worst day of his life. And the Clone Wars writers gave them water cooler conversations in the middle of battlefields. And some writer, on some Tuesday, probably not thinking too hard about it, wrote the line, "We're independent thinkers," and had every droid respond with, "Roger, Roger," and accidentally created the saddest joke in the entire Star Wars franchise. And then Kalani refused a shutdown order and spent 15 years guarding an empty base on a planet nobody remembered. And then the Empire melted down thousands of them for scrap while replacing them with humans who had less personality. And then a kid on a junkyard planet rebuilt one into a friend so loyal it died for him. The droids were designed to be nothing. They were manufactured to be forgotten the second they hit the ground. And somewhere between the Roger Rogers and the slapstick destruction, and one droid quietly saying, "It just got promoted," before being cut in half, millions of fans looked at these ridiculous, disposable, mass-produced machines and decided, no, actually, you're something. You matter to me. I don't care that you weren't supposed to. And honestly, that might be the most heroic thing about the whole Star Wars saga. Not the Jedi, not the lightsabers, not the prophecies and chosen ones. Just a bunch of people watching a show and deciding, without being asked, to care about characters the story told them not to. The droids couldn't choose to be individuals. The fans chose for them. Roger, Roger. If this one hit different, subscribe. More stories like this are coming.